what you call an emotion is actually a sensation in the body, is it not? When you're afraid, how do you know you're afraid? You experience a sensation in the body. If you're angry, you experience a sensation in the body. And so emotions appear as sensations in the body. And so this practice is a practice of becoming aware of the body and the sensations in the body and watching them come and go, that they change all the time. And not only that, but then the other part of the practice of Vipassana is to pay attention to the sensations in the body with equanimity. In other words, to pay attention to the sensations in the body without any attachment to them, without any necessary preference that they be any way other than the way they are. And so basically what that then translates into is that you're learning to pay attention to emotions without attachment to them, without preference with them, with an indifference to them. And if you can pay attention to emotions that way, then the emotions that normally trigger patterns of behavior from the past, right, those emotions start to discharge, and you start to become freer from those patterns. And the reason for that is that if you're not aware of those emotions with indifference or without attachment, and you identify with those emotions, okay, then you are going back and reliving another experience from your past, and it just deepens the imprint in your brain of that pattern. And so the whole process of Vipassana meditation is about reprogramming the brain. You could say reprogramming the brain or unprogramming those patterns. And the way you do that is when things arise emotionally, you become aware of them, you become aware of the way they appear in your body as sensations, and you simply are present to them. You don't identify with them, you don't act them out, you don't dramatize them. You understand that this is a reaction. And because you understand that this is a reaction, you just are a witness to it. You don't identify with it. And that doesn't mean that you never act on emotions, because part of being awake and aware is being awake and aware of what's going on in the world, not just what's going on in your body. And so by being awake and aware of what's going on in the world, and when emotions arise and they appear as sensations in the body, if the emotions that arise and appear as sensations in the body appear to be an appropriate response, right, to what's happening in the world, then you would identify with it, right? And then you would act it out. But the difference between this and the way it normally is for people is, for most people, they're not aware of what's happening, and therefore they don't have a choice, and therefore they dramatize and act out all reactions and consider all reactions to be related to what's happening in the world, which is the big mistake. In this class, one of the things that I have spoken of is the fact that meditation can be the beginning of the discovery, can be the beginning of the discovery. Because when you practice meditation, you're doing something that's different from just the idea of living in relationship to thinking, right? That's, for most people, that's how they're living their life. They're living as a thinker, right? In meditation, for many people, it's the first time you experience not living or not being in the environment that you're in and thinking, because in meditation, one of the first things we teach is to move your attention from the thoughts to the breath and maintain it on the breath. And when you're maintaining attention on the breath, you're not thinking. And for a lot of people, when they do that, that's the first time in their life that they ever started paying attention to something other than thinking, right? And it's also the reason why meditation is difficult for a lot of people, because, you know, when you do that, as you all well know, it isn't long before the attention goes back to thinking, because thinking is the way that people experience themselves in the world. And so to stay away from that for very long, it gets uncomfortable fast for people. You know, we don't know what's going on. So in the case of this monk, so when you practice meditation, it's the beginning of the possibility of discovering what I call the truth, or your true nature. And the truth or your true nature is the discovery that who you actually are is not a physical body. That's one of the primary aspects of the discovery, that who you actually are is not a physical body, that who you actually are is awareness itself. Right? And there are a lot of aspects to this discovery process, and that's something that we've talked about here in terms of, you know, how is it that that's the case, that you are awareness itself and you're not your body. And the process of meditation is a process of actually discovering in your own first-person direct experience that that's the case. And if you discover that that's the case, then it means that whatever happens to the physical body, which exists in time, right, it doesn't necessarily happen to what you are as awareness itself, because awareness is not physical. But even having said that, and even if you recognize that and you discover that, and even if you have the experience of that being the truth, you still wouldn't try setting yourself on fire to test it. And that's because even though you recognize and discover the truth of yourself as awareness itself, that discovery doesn't change the fact that you're still associated with the body in terms of the way your brain works, in terms of your conditioning and the way your mind works. You know, that when a baby is first born, for example, they don't know they're their body until a certain point in development, right? And then they know their body, and they start to identify with their body, and they start to react to their body, and they start to express their physical discomfort and so forth. So even though you discover the truth of yourself as awareness itself, you're still pretty much completely identified with your body, because that's the conditioning that happened from very early on in life all the way up until now, right? And so to know the truth of yourself as awareness itself, even if you have that truth experientially, that in itself is not going to rewire your brain or unprogram the program, right? The only thing you can say about the awareness that you are is that it's here. That's the only quality that it has, is that it's here. Everything else, there is no quality, right? And because that's the case, it's free. That's what freedom is. That's what the Buddha said when he said, I am awake. He was saying that I know who I am. I am awareness itself. And that's why it's called liberation, because liberation from what? Liberation from suffering, liberation from time, liberation from identifying with the body, liberation from emotional and psychological and physical pain, right? Even liberation from death, right? The idea of nirvana, for example, in Buddhism means that you are no longer subject to death. You're off the wheel of dying and being reborn again, reincarnation, right? You become a free spirit, that you're no longer subject to continuing to be reborn and suffer the limitations of human life. You know, you can, in the traditions of meditation and the traditions of Buddhism and the traditions of a lot of the Eastern disciplines and teachings, the idea was to transcend the material world, to transcend the physical body and all those things. And that's why they lived in caves. You know, that's why they lived in monasteries, to isolate themselves, to make it easier, you know, by not being around other people and getting reactivated and stimulated and everything. However, that is no longer that was one particular approach. In Zen, the approach was not necessarily that way all the time. And another approach can be, instead of isolating yourself and doing what it would take, which is very difficult and takes tremendous amount of practice and application of teaching, to transcend the physical body and actually not be the physical body anymore. Another approach is to not attempt to do that, to realize yourself as awareness and actually choose to be in the physical body, choose to be in the world the way the world is, but be free from the suffering of being in that world, because you're not experiencing yourself as that body, but you are still in the body. It's possible to recognize yourself as awareness and to develop your ability to consistently experience yourself that way, and not try and not identify with the body. You're actually going in the other direction. You're actually willing to be in the world, willing to be in the body, But know that you're not of the world, know that you're really not the body, right? And to the extent that you can develop that as your experience, you're free to actually enjoy your life in the world as a body, and to enjoy your relationships and enjoy all the things that the world has to offer us to experience instead of living in a cave for the rest of your life, right? And so that's another, and in my view, that is the ultimate possibility, you know, to be in the world and to be to accept the idea that the body is transportation to be in this realm. And it's not necessarily a bad idea. There's a lot to be experienced in the world that's enjoyable, right? So I mean, if you had a choice, right? If you had a choice, would you choose to go live in a cave and do all of what it would take for years and years and years to finally not identify with having a body at all? Or would you choose to be able to experience yourself as awareness even though you're in a body, and choose to be in the body, experiencing life without suffering, right? Without suffering, because knowing that your awareness itself means that the key aspect of being awareness itself in the world is that you're not expecting things to be any different than they are, that you don't prefer anything to be different than it is, that you allow everything to be the way it is. And so because you allow it to be the way it is, there may be pain in the physical body, right? There may be difficulties in life that you have to deal with, right? But there's no suffering because you're not expecting it to be different. That's where suffering comes in, right? That you don't like it, that you don't want it. But if that's not the case, because you're experiencing yourself as awareness itself, even though you're in a body and in a world, then you can really enjoy the experience. Your conditioning is what has you relate to things in a way where you react in terms of, I don't like this, I don't want this should be different, I don't like this, right? That's reacting, right? And all of our brains are conditioned in that way. And so when anything happens around us that should be different than the way that you think it should be, you get upset. That's the source of all human suffering in terms of psychological and emotional suffering, right? Depression, anxiety, fear, anger, the whole thing comes from that. So if I could wave a magic wand and your conditioning was no longer affecting you because you weren't identified with it anymore, you were just identified with your awareness, and even your conditioning wouldn't be upsetting to you. You could experience your conditioning in such a way, that's what I was talking about earlier about equanimity. You could experience your conditioning in such a way that as it played in your awareness, you weren't identified with it anymore. So it could come and it could go, and it would come and it would go, and you wouldn't get attached to it, and you would identify with it, you wouldn't dramatize it, you wouldn't act it out, right? And it would wind down because you weren't identifying with it anymore. And this is the way you would reprogram your brain, right? And when that happens and you get, you know, it doesn't have to even be all the way complete, you know, as that begins to happen, you begin to experience more and more being relaxed, more and more being satisfied, more and more being content, more and more being effective in living your life because you're not reacting, you're responding now, right? And more experiencing joy, joy being, the way I'm defining joy, right, is that you're experiencing life as an enjoyable, fulfilling experience all the time. That's what I say is joy. Enjoyment, right? What's enjoyment? Enjoyment, if you enjoy yourself, or if you enjoy yourself, if you enjoy yourself and you're enjoying who you really are as awareness itself, right? Then that's a very pleasurable experience because you're enjoying the fact that you can be with whatever's going on, free from reacting to it, and experiencing it in such a context that it makes sense to you that it's just part of life. How few people see things that way, right? How few people see things that way. But the possibility of seeing things that way exists for everybody. But the only way you're going to see things that way is you have to start from wherever you are. You begin to slow down, begin to pay attention and recognize awareness, right? And begin to do the work necessary to make the shift from identifying with your body and your personality to identifying with the awareness. That's the process. So the reality of it is that most people, there are many people in the world who meditate and they have an experience of awakening. You know, sometimes it happens with psychedelic drugs, sometimes it happens by itself, by some very difficult, impactful situation, the loss of a loved one, being diagnosed with a terminal illness, some impact, right? Some impact on you that shakes your world, that shakes your conditioning and everything. So it's fairly common that people have waking up experiences momentarily in their life. You could call it self-actualization. You could call it a peak experience, right? You could call it being in the flow. It's not uncommon for people to have that experience. And when you have that experience, if you understand what the experience is, it's a momentary glimpse of yourself. It's a momentary experience of being free from all of the conditioning that is normally there, right? But that experience, even if you understand having it and you know that it's an experience of yourself, is only the beginning of the process of waking up. It doesn't change anything. And so this is what you hear from a lot of people, well, I understand what enlightenment is, I understand who I am as awareness itself, but I'm not experiencing that, so what good is that doing me? In fact, it just bums me out that I know that that's possible and that's not the way my experience is, right? Well, yeah, but that's first of all, that gives you a place to begin from, right? To begin to deal with the conditioning that is running, that is causing you not to experience that. And there are ways to start to work with that conditioning, to start to deprogram that conditioning and start to free yourself from the effects of that conditioning so that you can experience being more present to reality as reality is. And even as you do that over time, right, progressively, you begin to experience that freedom. You begin to experience less reactivity. You begin to experience less depression, less anxiety. You begin to experience being able to be more responsive to people in your life and to the situations you find yourself in than you were before. I would say that, some of you people who have been coming to the class on a regular basis, what's your experience? If you've been meditating and you've been learning about these things, have you experienced some expansion? Have you experienced?
Example is right today, looking out the window. It's no different than a sunny day. Programs say, oh, it's rainy, it's dismal. I'm sure it kept people awake today. It's just no different than waking up and it's a sunny day. You take it in. It's today. It's now.
Yeah, that's a pretty
simple.
Yeah, that's a pretty obvious example, right? I mean, I brought that up here in the past that for most normal, and when I say normal, I mean abnormal, because abnormal is normal in this society, right? But for most normal people, the weather determines the quality of their life. That's an obvious example. And it's so pervasive that when you listen to the weather report's consistent with the way people see things. So the weather report will be, today's going to be nasty. That's what they'll say on the weather report. So they're speaking within the lie, right? Because obviously, whether it's raining or it's cloudy or it's windy or it's sunny, right? It's not nasty or it's not beautiful. It's just what it is. Your interpretation of it is what you're adding to that, right? And then if you don't know the difference between your interpretation and what's really happening, then rainy day will be nasty and you'll experience a nasty day. So that's a great example, right? But if you take that as one example, if you can be free from the weather report, as Steve said, and wake up in the morning and enjoy all the variety of the weather, I mean, if the weather was always the same and it never changed, that'd be the worst possible situation. It would be boring, wouldn't it, right? But the fact that it changes is experienced by most people to be a problem, isn't it? The fact that it changes is considered a problem, not a wonderful variety of experiences, right? The same thing is true with light. The fact that your experience is changing all the time, if you hold it in the right context, if you hold it in the context of, the possibility of enjoying your life, right? Then you would appreciate the fact that, wow, it's changing all the time and I don't know what's going to happen next. This is exciting. This is interesting, right? But you got to let go of your attachment to it being a certain way in order to enjoy that, right? Just like the weather. And if you let go of your attachment to it being a specific way, then what you're doing when it comes to life is you're saying, the way life is sometimes it feels good, sometimes it feels bad. Sometimes circumstances are comfortable, sometimes they're uncomfortable, sometimes things are easy, sometimes they're hard. That's the way life is. But if you hold it in the context of enjoying all of life, like enjoying all of the weather, right? Then you begin to appreciate no matter how it is, right? And you can appreciate this easily from the experience of awareness itself, because no matter how it is, you're equanimous, right? You don't have any preferences for it to be any way. And so if you're experiencing difficulties, it's like, okay, this is difficult right now. You just experience what it is. This is difficult right now. Is it uncomfortable? Yeah, it's uncomfortable, right? But see, from the context of the experience of yourself, the way that would be viewed is, it may be uncomfortable, right? But who I am is never uncomfortable. It may be uncomfortable, that's just the discomfort of the person. And so I can be here with that, and I can actually enjoy that as part of the way life is. You know, as you get into this and as you begin to appreciate and understand how things work, how it all works, right? You begin to see that there is a possibility of actually experiencing life in such a way that it begins to become the way it was when you were a child. You remember when you were a child, you wake up in the morning, and you didn't want to go to sleep when you were a kid, right? You wake up in the morning and you can't wait to get out of bed. You can't wait to start. You can't wait to play. Life is about play, right? Life is about play. If you wake up and you experience the truth of yourself as awareness, it goes back to being that way again. Life is about play again. It's interesting and exciting that you don't know what's going to happen next. For most people, that's dreadful. Right? For most people, they wake up in the morning and they dread the fact that they don't know what's going to happen that day, and they want to get it over with, right? But for somebody who's awake, they wake up in the morning and it's, oh, wow, I'm still here, right? What's going to happen next? And everything that happens is like, oh, wow, that's interesting, you know, that doesn't feel good. Oh, that feels good, right? It's like that. So it is a big deal. And it's, you see, you can see that it's a big deal because now you see the difference. Somebody that's never been here doesn't know what it's like to be here. So they don't know the difference. They don't know the difference. You live in a state of mind all the time. You think a state of mind is reality. You don't know it's a state of mind. But if you discover not being a state of mind, if you discover being present and being willing to experience everything that's happening in present time, then you know the difference between what that's like and what it's like to be in your head all the time. Be in your head all the time and be worried and concerned and thinking about the past and thinking about the future. You know, that's the ordinary life that most people are experiencing, and it's not a pretty thing. That's why prescription drugs are so popular. If you're living in that life, you know, what I say to my clients when they come to me and they're suffering from anxiety and depression is, I understand. I understand. Given the state of mind that most people are in, right? It makes sense to take drugs. It makes sense to smoke pot. It makes sense to drink alcohol. Because you're doing something to escape from the suffering that's happening. So a lot of the new people, the new age people that are talking about approaches to dealing with addiction, for example, they're really pioneering a whole new way of looking at addiction that's different from the past. And the cure for addiction that they're talking about is having compassion and empathy for somebody who is addicted and saying to that person, good for you that you found some way to alleviate your suffering and your pain. Now let's talk about the possibility of doing it in a different way that doesn't have negative consequences like a lot of the addictions have. So you can become addicted to being awake. That would be a nice addiction to have, right? Addicted to experiencing joy, addicted to being without preferences, addicted to letting go of your expectations. Those addictions would allow you to experience a relief from the suffering and the pain that is so common to people given the state of mind that they're living their life in. So, you know, meditation is just the possibility of a beginning of starting to move away from being lost up in this collective insanity that we call reality. Right? collective, what the reality is that we live in, and if you don't believe what I'm saying, just watch the news. The collective reality that we live in, that we think is reality, is insanity. It's insanity, because it is a state of mind. It is one way of seeing things that's very limited, fear-based, and reactive. And because that's the case, it shows up the way it shows up, which shows up as a horror show. That's that's what the person meant when he said life sucks and then you die, right? If you start to, I work with people in psychotherapy, right? And when I do work with people, I incorporate what I'm talking about here, right? Because I'm not interested in just helping the conditioned person to be better. I'm interested in helping them discover that they're not the conditioned person. That gives them a lot more possibility, right? But what I found myself doing is when I'm working with people, I don't waste time waiting for them to be ready. You know what I mean? They couldn't afford that. That's somebody who'll be in psychotherapy the rest of their life, right? So I don't waste time for people to be ready. I move in, right? And I start saying to them, look, here's what you need to pay attention to. Here's what you need to notice. Here's what's really going on here, right? And one of the things that I've noticed recently is that I've lost touch with how that's going to be impacting somebody, right? For somebody who has no experience with any of this stuff, to move that quick with them, for them is an assault. You know what I mean? It's an assault. And so what they do is they come back and they attack. They attack the person who's trying to wake them up, right? That's something that you just have to understand. And yeah, it's true, there are times when what comes up for me is, I like to give somebody a good smack, right? But it's a loving smack. It's not smacking you because I can't tolerate you. It's smacking because I can't stand watching you suffer anymore. You know what I mean? And there are practices and disciplines, like in Zen meditation, where the Zen master will walk around in the meditation hall, and if he senses that you are not, in the meditation, that you're not maintaining the posture and that you're not paying attention, he has a big stick. And he comes around and he'll come behind you and come down and smack you on your shoulder and scare the shit out of you. But what he's doing is he's waking you up. He's just saying, come back. And when you're in a community like that, you agree to accept this. You put yourself in the hands of the master and you agree to accept that he wakes you up, even if when he does it, you want to kill him. Even if when he does it, it scares the shit out of you, right? But you understand the context. You understand that he's doing it, he's working in your best interest. So it's a slippery slope, right? When I work with people sometimes, it gets to the point where they're attacking me. And what I say to them when they do that is, I understand what's happening, I understand what you're doing, I don't blame you for attacking me. I can understand from your point of view, that makes sense, right? And so all I can say to you at that point is, it's going to go one way or the other now, right? You're either going to see what's really going on here, and that your attacks on me are because you're uncomfortable because I'm confronting the way that you're being, and the way that you're being is the reason why you're here. The way that you're being is the reason why you're here, because your life's not working, because you're suffering. And I'm confronting that, right? And that way of being and that person that you consider yourself to be is now attacking me for doing that, right? Now we can work this through, right? We can work this through if you're willing to accept what I just said, right? And if you're not, right? And sometimes the people aren't. No, right now, I'm into the breath work, right? Those of you who hang around me, I'm into breath work a lot because I've discovered how valuable and powerful that can be in working through, the process of not unprogramming your conditioning. And so I'm very interested in how to incorporate that in the process. Okay. Have a good day.